Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to BookTrek 2021. This is a 5-month mission I'm embarked on with a bunch of other booktubers. We're reading Star Trek fiction for the rest of 2021. We started with the original series in August, and then we moved on to Star Trek The Next Generation. Then I had a disastrous month with Star Trek Deep Space Nine, where I loved the show. I couldn't find a book that was worth the paper it was printed on. And that started to feel cursed. But the curse is lifted. We have moved on now for November to Star Trek Voyager. Fantastic iteration of the show. I don't agree with a lot of the show's detractors who like all the rest of it, but hate the fact that one of the main characters is an optimistic, bouncy, weird little alien cook named Neelix. People seem to hate that about this show and can't forgive it. I like everything about the show. And I was worried because of my horrible experience with Deep Space Nine that Voyager novels would let me down, especially since a lot of these are rereads. I thought I'd be really disappointed, but I'm off to a roaring good start, and that just continues. I picked another early novel this time around, The Murdered Son by Christie Golden, which raises a couple of the standing issues of Voyager. Of course, Voyager is a Star Trek story about a Federation starship that is thrown across the galaxy, 80,000 light years from the Federation, far away from any help, a long, long time to get back, even at maximum warp. And they're still explorers. They're still part of Starfleet, and that is the conflict that I mentioned yesterday. They have an overriding urge to get home, but they don't want to just ignore everything in their path. They have a duty to explore and report on the Delta Quadrant in the event that they ever do get back to the Alpha Quadrant. This book butts right on that, because the tension between those two things is always present in the show. Catherine Janeway, the captain of the Voyager, usually really doesn't want to get all that involved. They are just passing through. The Voyager is just passing through. They're not sticking around. They don't want to get embroiled in local conflicts. And that's what happens in this book. Voyager does get involved in a local conflict. And again, as one of the books that we read yesterday, there is also the dangled possibility of maybe a way back home, maybe an artificial wormhole of some kind. So the ship gets involved in all that, and because that it's kind of a tense standoff type storyline, Janeway's chief of security, Tuvok, her Vulcan best friend, plays a much larger role in the book, I thought, a much more key or pivotal role than Tom Paris, the other person on this cover. And Christie Golden does a wonderful job in this book. It's a very entertaining novel. You'll read it in one shot. Christie Golden does a really good job in this book of sort of fleshing out what the complexities would be, what the complexities always are if a human decides to make a Vulcan their best friend. It does happen. There is precedent. There is Jim Kirk and Mr. Spock, but we assume that it's rare, and it's done really well in this book. Janeway is revealed in these pages as being fairly expert at reading vocal and semantic cues from Tuvok that no one else on Voyager would see, even if they're sitting right across from him. That works really well. It's always a sign for me that a Star Trek novel is doing its job, is doing a good job, if the writer can give us a briefing scene where it's just characters talking around a table and you're still really interested. If the writer can do that, then the writer probably understands these characters, and Christie Golden really does. This is, as you can tell by the presence of the bun of steel, this is still early on in Voyager days. This is Voyager's split in terms of its timeline, pre 7 of 9 and post 7 of 9. Here there is no Borg, there is no 7 of 9, but I'm perfectly okay with those two dynamics. I'll read a book in either one of those halves of the series. And this was a good little novel. Nobody's going to mistake it for a Hugo winner. But it never flagged, it never bored me, and it also never had me say, oh, come on. That's not anybody in the story. Even in these early days of the show, that's not anything that would happen or that this character would say. And also, this plot is bad. This plot has big holes in it. There was nothing like that in this book. I think I read this when it first came out, but it wasn't really ringing any bells when I read it this time, so maybe not. Maybe I meant to and didn't get around to it. I know I had the mass market paperback, and I usually read the things I have. But a lot of this felt new, especially there's a twist at the end, of course, and you sort of see it coming. It's telegraphed pretty easily. But even so, it was effective, and I think at that moment, if I had read this before, I would have remembered it. So maybe if I started it, I didn't get all the way through, just didn't bother. But I'm glad I did this time, very much so. Not only because I read, it's just a Voyager episode. It's an episode of the show. And I shouldn't say just, because that's very hard to do. We saw plenty of writers can't do that. So I'm glad that I read it on that regard. I'm also glad because it continues my streak with Voyager. That is just great. Now tomorrow or tonight, when I pick what I'm going to do, which Voyager novel I'm going to read tonight, I'm intentionally going to pick something from much later, not only at the introduction of Seven of Nine, but well past that, and see if maybe I can test my luck and read a much later novel after the Voyagers encountered the Borg, after all that sort of stuff, after Seven of Nine is trying to integrate with the crew. We'll see. We'll see if that works. I will report back. In the meantime, I hope your trek is going well. I'd be curious to know if any of you are reading Star Trek fiction, aside from my hosts. But I'm going to wrap this up, but I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.